All right, guys, let's get right into it for Unit 15. This is going to be the only video I provide because it's a very short unit. And there's quite a little bit of information, but the information is a little bit more common than some of the other stuff we've covered throughout our textbook. Jumping right into it, drugs and medicinal drugs. Now, drugs are any substance taken into the body that modifies or affects chemical reactions in the body. All medicine contains drugs, but not all drugs are medicines. So antibiotics are drugs that are considered as medicines. Antibiotics, probably all of you have taken one at some point, but ultimately they are used in our medical community to help kill bacteria that disrupts their metabolic processes. They are made by fungi to kill bacteria, and what they specifically do is attack the cell wall of the bacteria cells that you have in your body. So what's unique about, if you remember, think about the structure of a human cell. We don't have a cell wall. We just have the cell membrane. Plant cells and bacteria cells have a cell wall. So when you're looking at antibiotics, what they are specifically attacking are cell walls. So they're not going to harm your human cells. They're going to harm simply the bacteria cells. We have had in recent decades antibiotic resistant bacteria form. So bacteria have evolved to be able to resist certain antibiotics, which is pretty unfortunate for us. But ultimately, this is why doctors are going to be really, really, really encouraging of you always to take the whole round of your antibiotic to kill off all bacteria. Because if you don't and you leave some behind, it can grow and become resistant to that particular type of antibiotic. And we've got a little bit of information here that you can pause and read to see how that resistance is formed, okay? Moving on, make sure you just understand MRSA is one for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, which is very dangerous. This is the one that is resistant to most antibiotics, and the one that we hear of if you have an MRSA infection. It can be pretty dangerous. It definitely requires a hospital stay, and it's something that we have to have lots of medical attention for. Antibiotics are not effective against viruses. So if you have the flu or the coronavirus, unfortunately, there's no magic pill to take like an antibiotic, because antibiotics kill the bacteria by damaging those cell walls. Viruses do not have cell walls. So they're just really unaffected by an antibiotic. So that's one main reason why we can't use those to fight viruses. And then we need to jump right into misused drugs. Now, for your book, they're going to hone in on alcohol and heroin. Okay. Now, we know there are lots of other types of drugs, but this is the one that you'll need to know for test questions. And then these tables, again, provided in your notes that you're going to do an activity to fill out and that you can use on your quiz for this unit. Just looking at alcohol and heroin, what they target, their symptoms of those, and the effects of how they affect your body. Just make sure you can look over that. Understanding also their withdrawal symptoms, and then just the negative social implications if you are to use alcohol or heroin. Both of these can form addictions, which means ultimately you have a psychological and emotional addiction, meaning you're unwilling to give them up because you enjoy them. And then a physical addiction. That is when the drug becomes necessary for your body to work normally, because the absence of the drug causes such high withdrawal symptoms you can't function. And then you can also grow a tolerance to drugs to cope with the unnatural changes. So an addict continues to have to take increasing amounts of the drug to achieve the same feeling that they once achieved. And this also increases the risk of overdose. So that's why drugs are so incredibly dangerous. And then, of course, heroin users, typically heroin is injected with needles, and that just increases your risk of contracting HIV or hepatitis, especially if you're sharing those needles. We can also talk about something that, to me, is the most interesting form of scientifically why someone would do something like so dangerous that we know, like heroin, right? And it all has to do with how heroin affects our neurotransmitters. So GABA is a neurotransmitter that typically inhibits the release of dopamine, and kind of controls that release. As we need it, it'll allow it. But if we don't need the dopamine, it inhibits that release. Now, what heroin or the use of heroin will do is that where normally the GABA neurotransmitter would control the release of dopamine, it removes that. So as it inhibits the release of that, so the opioid is going to suppress the GABA in your system and just let that dopamine flood. So that's where you get that sense of euphoric feeling that you get when you're using drugs, because it's keeping your body from being able to control dopamine where it just floods your system. So you get that feel-good feeling. But with all good things, they must come to an end. So you're also going to get the crash later. And then, of course, just the effects of excessive consumption of alcohol. We know that alcohol can lead to liver damage, such as cirrhosis. It can cause anemia. It can cause lots of issues with coronary arteries and cardiovascular disease, brain damage, peptic ulcers, and then, of course, obesity. And then if you are pregnant, it can damage the developing fetus, give you a higher risk of miscarriage, premature birth, and then a reduced average birth weight. So it can really affect an unborn child. We also talk about tobacco smoking within this unit and what it can lead to. Lots of different diseases. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is known as COPD, lung cancer, coronary heart disease, and then lots of implications if you are pregnant. It reduces the amount of oxygen available to the fetus, miscarriage, premature birth, low birth weight of babies. And then, of course, if you're tobacco smoking, you're putting more than 1,000 known chemicals into your lungs that are harmful and carcinogenic. And I know this particular textbook was, I think, established in like 2004. So it's been many years since we've had a new textbook. However, y'all have more access to the Jewel. So understand that tobacco smoking, although a little bit different, the Jewel puts some exactly the same risk of disease here that's listed. Same for the Jewel and tobacco smoking. The Jewel also contains tons of chemicals that are carcinogenic that you're putting into your body, some of which we don't even know the effects of because they're so new. Definitely look at this table, get it filled out for your notes of how each of these affect our gas exchange system, nicotine, carbon monoxide, tar, and smoke particles, okay? Of course, smoking can lead to lung cancer. There's a graph here that just shows you the risk of lung cancer. And ultimately, gives you an idea of that. Hormones are also something that can be abused, and it's covered in your textbook using testosterone and anabolic steroids. So you can pause here and read the effects of what that would have on an athlete and the dangers in that. And then, of course, there's a few notes about plant hormones that you can pause here and read. But ultimately, get these notes down. Finish the activity, any of your CFUs, and this is the video for Unit 15. We are done. Good job, guys.